tell. I've lived in Camden County since January 25th, 2020.
Can you move the microphone up?
Oh, I'm sorry, I got used to it. The first thing I did when I moved here was to register my cars and to register for voting. And I immediately applied to be a poll worker. Voting is very, very important to me, as I'm sure it's to everyone else. And I'm just, as the secretary of the Republican Party, I received a letter of ex officio member, and I felt it was my duty to investigate. And that's what I did. And you have all the paperwork in front of you. And if you have any questions for me, I think it was pretty clear what I did. I didn't go back a third time because I was told that I was harassing someone by knocking on their door. And from this evidence, since I never saw Mr. Burnham, I concluded that he did not live at that residence.
Do you have anything else for the board?
No, that's it.
Can you remain there, Mr. Burnham? Do you have any cross-examination questions?
Not really. I don't think so. But was my application to be a member of the board what prompted you to do this?
Yes, sir.
No one prompted.
No, sir. I did this on my own.
All right, any questions from the board? I do have a couple of questions.
Sure, sir.
When did you realize that Dr. Burnham, his name was on the deed to 204 Candy Court?
I looked it up before I even went to the deed. That was just recently, because when I looked up in the tax records, his wife with her maiden name or her other married name, I don't know what it was on the deed. And then I knew that, so I knew that, I thought that the place was then rented because Mr. Burnham's name wasn't on it. Apparently it was changed over to both their names. And then the mailing address was the vacant property at, on Osborne Road. And so I made some conclusions, but I wanted to further it because integrity in voting is very important to me, and I just want the truth. That's all I want, is the truth.
Did you follow up with the tax assessor's office to make sure that?
Yes, I looked at the tax assessors, and it was, at that time, it was going to the Mrs. Burnham's house in Yulee. That's where the tax records were going.
So you actually spoke to the tax assessor?
No, I didn't speak to him. I just
Okay.
looked up the records.
Okay, so you did online?
Yes.
And the online records aren't updated as far as the ownership, but maybe twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as far as the deeds are concerned, once they come into the tax assessor's office, they're uploaded immediately. So if you look on the tax assessors or the Q Public, if you could bring that up, Ms. Kayla. Q Public.
I did bring that. Unfortunately, when I left the house, I had my paperwork on the thing and forgot it.
So if you could scroll down just a little bit. This is more of maybe a training thing. Keep scrolling. Okay, come back. All right, so this is what it looks like if you look it up on your phone.
Mm-hmm.
You see where there's a columns radio tab over there on the right-hand side?
Mm-hmm.
Normally, if you look it up on a PC, that all the columns will be filled. So if you look it up on your phone, that's all you're going to see.
No, I looked it up on my computer.
You looked it up on your computer. Okay, because normally all the columns are filled up.
Right.
And you would see that when you pulled it up, wherever you pulled it up in September, you'd have seen that on 1/10/23, the deed was actually executed to put it in both their names.
Right. That was my mistake in saying
Right.
that.
So just for future reference, make
Mhm.
sure that you look at everything
I sure will.
and then follow up with the tax assessor office and maybe even the clerk of course to see if there's a deed filed.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? You may be seated, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Burnham, do you have any testimony?
Yes.
Shannon, can you swear him in, please?
Do you solemnly swear that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? under pains and penalties of perjury, so help you God. Thank you.
Please come to the podium, state your name. And speak.
My name is James H. Burnham. I've lived in Camden County since 1977. I opened a business here January 78. I was in that business for almost 43 years until 2019 when I had an eye surgery, which left me unable to see. So I had taken 10 days off from work to have the surgery done and never went back. Right after that surgery, well, let me go back. I first registered to vote on June the 17th, 1968. It was a very proud day for me. I got off of work that day. I was the first one to the time clock to punch out because I was on a mission. I was going to register to vote and to register for the draft. And I felt very proud. I wish I could instill in young people today the pride that I felt going to register to vote and also registering for the draft, even though I knew that I might get to go see Southeast Asia. It turns out I did not, but for the next 10 years, I never missed an election. I voted in Dodge County elections for the next 10 years. 2 of those years, I lived in Davenport, Iowa. I didn't move my voter registration because I knew where my home was. One of those years, I lived in St. Mary's, trying to get enough money to get back in school. One of those years, I lived in Atlanta, doing the same thing, working at J.C. Penney's catalog distribution. I never moved my voter registration until I got married and lived in Dodge County. I moved it 3 addresses down because the house that I was living in was 3 houses down from where my parents were. My wife was registered to vote in Chester, Georgia, which is also in Dodge County. Her father was the mayor there. But she moved her voter registration to our house. And whenever I went back to school again, we left our voter registration in Dodge County because we both knew where our home was. When I moved down here, even though I still had property in Dodge County, I knew I was never going to live there again. So I moved my voter registration here. Now, during the time that I was here, I've always used my office as my mailing address. The reason I do that is to avoid having people come to my door and knock on my door, bothering me about stuff I don't want to be bothered about. Now, during that time, I did have some incidents that made me really glad that I did that. During the 80s and the 90s, I was very active in the Republican Party. In fact, there was no Republican Party in Camden County until I organized it in 1984. It had been organized back in the 60s during the Nixon campaign, and my uncle was the chairman at that time. During the 1980 campaign for president, Jack Gross had organized it along with Charlie Smith Sr., not the junior but his father. And a couple other people that worked at the telephone company had come together and had organized a party during the 1980 presidential campaign, but they never bothered to reorganize after that. So I reorganized, I think it was in 83. Now, during the 80s, twice my sign was damaged, once by a gunshot that went all the way through it. My window at my office was shot one time. And then I had the sign damaged again by apparently a marble and a slingshot, I would assume. I found the marble inside when I disassembled the sign to get that repaired. That's some of the reasons that I prefer not to have my voting address, because I feel relatively sure that it was some of my political activity at the time, as the county was beginning to turn from blue to red, and somebody didn't like that, or they didn't like some of the letters that I used to write to the editor when I could see how to read and write. Now, during the time that I've lived here, my first residence was on Ann Street. I was registered there. Then I moved to Point Peter and I registered there. And then I moved to, Bristol, well, then I moved to Coleraine Road. I lived there for a while. I continued to get my mail at 1836. Then I bought a house in, well, then I built a house. I already had the property, but I built a house in Bristol Hammock. During that time, I had to move my registration to Kingsland. That was the only time I was not registered to vote in St. Mary's. But I still received my mail at my official address, 1836 Osborne Road. I still own that property. I still use that as a mailing address. It is not vacant. It is being rented by a subcontractor, a painting subcontractor. I have disconnected the power that was in my name there and the water that was in my name. It is now in the renter's name. But I still get mail there. But I also get mail mostly about official business at my home residence, 204 Candy Court, not 210 Candy Court as you wrote in the, and also there's no Osborne Avenue in St. Mary's. There's an Osborne Road and an Osborne
Please address
Street.
the board. Please just address the board.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. But where was I? So that's some of the reasons that I do this. Now, I would like to show you some documentation. I'm visually impaired, so I really can't see.
Okay. So the board will take a look at the evidence and we'll hand it to the challenger so that she can also look at the evidence. Okay. Okay, I don't want to hold on to your driver's license, but it does say it expires in 2026 and it is from Candy 204 Candy.
Thank you.
Okay. Here's the assessors. The shutters in the name. It's the old one.
Now, when the person that went,
Just a second, the information you gave us is old from the tax assessor's office. It still shows just your wife's name in there. Do you have anything?
That was what came in the mail to us. We didn't.
Correct. Okay. Can you pull up Q Public again?
Sorry.
Just so that we can take a look at it and scroll all the way to the top. Okay. Can you go down where it says owner? All right. So this is the current Q Public and it does show that James H. Burnham is the owner of it and it was executed on a deed back in January of this year. Yes.
okay, back to my voter registration. I was in a bad relationship at the time. When I moved back to St. Mary's, I moved to Magnolia Street. I lived there for a couple of years. Then I bought a house on Acorn Street. I lived there for a while. Then I moved to Palmetto Street and sold my house on Acorn Street. After my eye surgery in 2019, I decided I needed to remove myself from the relationship that I was in. So I moved into my office, which was vacant at the time because I could not practice. Well, I don't know exactly what the rules are for living in commercial property, but there was no business there. So I kind of kept that low profile because I didn't have any place else. My sister, and I was being visually impaired, I needed some assistance from time to time. And I have some extended family that would provide that. But my sister asked me to come stay with her. And I did that for about 2 years. It was after that period is when I married Nancy. Now, I still maintain my legal residence as 204 Candy Court. When I file my taxes, she and I file taxes separately. I file my taxes in Georgia, she files hers in Florida. I think we fought a war about taxation without representation. And I maintain that I am qualified as an elector based on all the evidence I've presented. I have ownership of a home. I'm a resident there. I have 2 roommates there, and they were harassed. The first one, and the only reason I did not take out, or we did not take out a criminal trespass warrant is because Dustin, the first person she encountered.
Sir, that's a separate matter as far as the criminal is concerned. We understand that she went to the house. And can we move on from that?
Well, we can,
Okay.
but if she ever comes back again,
That's between you and her and not the board, okay?
okay. So, what questions might you have for me?
Do you intend to remain a Camden County resident?
I absolutely do.
Okay. Go ahead.
Chairman Rappin, Mr. Byrne, the only reason I bring this up is because this was information that was in the packet. The application for homestead exemption, it was dated in May of '23. It says that is any part of that property rented, talking about Osborne Street. That's a commercial property.
Actually, if you look in B, section B, it talks about 204 Candy Court. He put his mailing address on the top.
This one?
Yeah, on the top, and
Okay.
then a Candy Court down in section B. I made that same mistake also when I first read it. But the homestead exemption is for 204 Candy Court.
Yeah, there's no homestead exemption on 1836 Osborne.
No, can't be. It's
Thank you
commercial.
for clarifying that. Okay.
So one of the rules for becoming or staying a resident or becoming a resident of Georgia is if you have a homestead exemption. Now, I understand this is just an application, has not been approved yet, but
That's correct.
but if you can prove that you, and this is between you and the tax assessor, it has nothing
Yes.
to do with the board. You just have to prove that you live there.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions for the board? Challenge, do you have any questions? You're allowed to crop.
Do you live in that house?
I do. And I give the roommates a very good rent agreement because they're sharing it with me.
Don't live with your wife and you live.
Where I sleep is my business.
I just thought where you sleep is where you reside. And anyone can own property and rent it out and not be a resident.
You know, I recall that once, during the time that I've been here, I served as a precinct chairman of the Harriet's Bluff precinct for almost 20 years. During that time, I made every effort to observe all the election laws as they applied. The only time I ever challenged electors was when I knew that these people were not living in Camden County, but Charlton County, but they were voting in both counties.
Are you registered to vote any other county or state other than Camden
I've
County?
never been registered to vote anywhere except Dodge County until 1977 and Camden County until today. And I hope will be tomorrow.
Is that all? Mr. Burnham, is that all?
Unless you have more questions.
I do have
Yeah,
This,
go ahead.
this reminds me of the movie Blazing Saddles. Now, the only reason this came about is because I wanted to continue to participate in the Republican committee, which I've participated in longer than anybody, because there was not one here until I started it. I have served on that committee for probably 40 years continuously in some office. Now, I understand that there is a new regime that doesn't always agree with me. And I've kind of made my reputation of being disagreeable when I believe that I am correct and they're wrong. But this reminds me of Cleavon Little in Blazing Saddles pulling the gun on himself because she's supposed to be a Republican who is supposed to be supporting the growing the Republican Party in Camden County. Instead, she's out trying to remove legal electors from the list. I am going to start a petition to have her removed from the committee for cause.
Sir, that has nothing to do with this meeting today.
Okay.
Okay. We do have more questions from the board.
Mr. Byrne, I just want to clarify one more time. Do you live in Yulee, Florida?
I stay there sometimes.
Thank you.
I also spent most of July in Nevada, but I don't live there.
Any more questions?
I have one more question.
Mr.
For the 204 Candy Court, part of that property is rented?
And that's going to affect the home exemption. I'm going to find out how that affects it. I don't know that yet.
Thank you.
Questions?
I guess I had one question, because he says sometimes he stay in Yulee. Could you, about what percentage of the time would you say that you reside?
I don't think I have to answer that question because, unless my wife asked me that.
Ms. Beadle, you're allowed to do rebuttal if you would like.
All I can say.
Please
is
come up to the microphone.
All I can say is if I was allowed to go back and just knock on the door, I wasn't trespassing. I knocked on the door and asked if Mr. Burnham lived here, and I left directly when I was told
I
to leave.
understand that.
And I would have gone back to find out more if he lived there on another day or something. But after the man followed me, I did not want to go back there. And I just thought I had my evidence by them telling me to get off the property and not ask questions. And the lady said she lived there. So that is all. She didn't say Mr. Burnham lived here. She said, I live here. So that's all I can say.
Yes, sir, go ahead. If it's relevant to the public hearing.
The second time Miss Butel went to our house, she did not knock on the door. She fiddled with the lock because there was no cars in the driveway.
Sir,
Yes,
let's
I think it is relevant. I think it-
relevant of whether you're a resident of Camden County? No.
Relevant to what she did.
We're not here for that, sir. We're here to determine whether you're a resident of Camden County or not. Anything else? Anyone else? All right, the hearing is adjourned. Reconvene the special called meeting. New business discussion concerning elector challenge of James H. Burnham to remain on the Camden County electors list. Do I have a motion to accept or reject the challenge? I will make a motion to reject the challenge. So is there a second? Motion fails. All right, we have two choices. We can either adjudicate this today or we have to have a continuance.
I move to have a continuance.
Okay, when would you like this continuance? All right. It's been moved and seconded. We have a continuance. We do have this Thursday at 4 p.m. available. Yes, we will have to approve that. I'm just trying to clarify when we will be able to do a continuance.
Can we do it at board meeting? Schedule for Thursday.
Yes, that's what I was planning on doing.
I'd like to do that.
Okay. All those in favor of a continuance till October 19th at 4 p.m., say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The regular meeting is adjourned and we're going to convene the public hearing. The Camden County Board of Election Registration hearing continuation is called to order. All members are present. I see the challenger and the challenged voter are here. Before we begin, I need to apologize to both the challenger and the challenged voter, along with my fellow board members and election staff. I did not perform the in-depth research that would have been required for this challenge. I failed to prepare the board with vital information such as judicial decisions, attorney general opinions. I failed both the challenger and the challenged. This vital information was contained in the code book that I look at every day. I looked up the applicable codes. I read them completely, understanding the legislative branch crafted the words. Where I erred was not taking into consideration the judicial branch, which actually tested these laws. And that's what we're going to talk about here in a little bit. I'm going to ask the IT representative to bring up the Word document. And as we go through these, if you have any questions, please stop so we can get them answered. All right, the first thing we had was a homestead exemption. There was a question about if a house is partially rented and the owner still lives in the house. Can it be homestead exemption? If you'll bring it up a little bit. This is the opinion of the Attorney General. It says exemption on house is occupied partially by owner and partially by tenant. Person who is the person's family occupies a portion of the person's house as a dwelling may receive a homestead exemption, although remainder is occupied by the person's tenants. Okay? So that answers that question. All right, there was a little known case in 1997. There was a mayor's race in Midway, Georgia. And the two candidates, one was within probably about 8 or 10 votes of the other one. The loser decided he wanted to challenge some voters, and he did so. It came before the Supreme Court of Georgia, and this is what they decided. Two of the voters challenged on residency grounds were Howard Freeman and his wife, Carolyn Freeman. Their testimony showed that Mr. Freeman grew up in Midway and entered the military, and all of his relatives still live in Midway. When Mr. Freeman retired from the military in 1993, they voted in 1997, he retired in 93. He should have updated his residency at that point when he retired. The Freemans had a house in Hinesville, but always considered Midway to be their home. Mr. Freeman worked for the city of Midway, and they were regularly traveled back and forth between the two cities. The Freemans attended church in Midway and had a trailer there, which they sold 2 or 3 years ago prior to the election. After the sale of the trailer, they would stay in Midway with the Freeman's mother. Mr. Freeman apparently still owns real property in Midway and is in Midway almost every day. Mrs. Freeman's bank account is in Midway, and she has voted in Midway for 16 years. The Freemans expressed intent to keep their house in Hinesville temporarily and to return to Midway permanently. Finding the fact regarding voter residency shall not be set aside unless clearly erroneous, and due regard shall be given to the opportunity of the trial court to judge the credibility of the witness. The evidence authorized the trial court's finding that both Mr. and Mrs. Freeman were qualified to vote in the city of Midway. All right, the other thing we're going to talk about is length to stay away from a domicile is immaterial. When an individual travels away from the individual's domicile for a time, it is immaterial, whether such a stay is for 1 month or any number of months, provided it does not become so extended that it can be reasonably inferred that there is an actual intention to make a change in domicile. And the last thing is domicile. Prerequisites for change. For a person to change a person's domicile, and domicile and residency are synonymous. It is essential for that person should have a bona fide intent to make the change. In addition, the person must also declare an intent to change the person's domicile and to do some act in execution of such intent. That's what the law says. Is there any questions? All right. We'll move on. All right, we're going to go through the process of continuation. And per the Georgia Rules and Regulations, Rule 295-11-02, Ms. Buell and Mr. Burnham, you were reminded that you're both still under oath. Do you have any additional witnesses from either side? Okay. Reminder, per 21-229, the burden shall be on the elector making the challenge to prove that the person being challenged is not qualified to remain on the electors list. In order of presentation, the challenger shall present any additional information. The challenged shall be allowed to cross-examine, and then the board will cross-examine also. Mr. Burnham, you're not required to prove anything at this session. It is all on your challenger to prove that. And you're not compelled to speak or provide any evidence from here on. Any questions? All right, we'll call up the first witness. Ms. Beal.
Sir, I really have no other evidence or to present.
Okay.
The only thing is, my only evidence is my common sense with dealing with this and what I read, what I heard, and that my common sense tells me that Mr. Burnham lives in Yulee and that he doesn't live with his renters in St. Mary's. But I have nothing further to go on that. And I just would like to thank you all for this hearing, for coming back and listen to me. And I know whatever decision you make, I totally respect it and thank you all.
Mr. Burnham, do you have any questions? Cross-examination? Nothing? Board have any questions? No questions? All right, Mr. Burnham, do you plan on making a statement or anything?
Just that
You're not required to, by the way.
the only statement I had was the one I made the other day, that I have always considered myself to be a Camden County resident, and continue to be so. I pay my taxes in Georgia. And I don't know what else to tell you.
Board, do you have any questions? Specifically rated for this? All right. All right, seeing there is nothing else, hearing is adjourned. Reconvening the regular board meeting. All right, unfinished business. Discussion concerning elector challenge of James H. Burnham to remain on the Camden County electors list. Do I have a motion to accept or reject the challenge?
Motion that we reject the challenge.
Do I have a second? I will second that motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Pardon? Yeah. Motion is denied. Do I have a motion to accept the challenge?
I'll make the motion to accept the challenge.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All right. I have discussion. I just showed you what the Supreme Court of Georgia said about a person that did not even live in Midway, Georgia, was allowed to vote in did not live, they lived in Hinesville, voted in Midway, and the Supreme Court said because their intention outweighed where they lived. If we go ahead and accept this challenge and it gets to the Superior Court, it will be overturned. I have no doubt in my mind. All right, any other further discussion? All those in favor of accepting this challenge, say, or raise your hand. All those opposed? You got 2 hands or 3? How many hands we have? 2 hands. All those opposed? Pardon? Okay, so we have 3. All right, all those opposed? Motion to reject is made. All right. I have a couple of comments to accept the challenge. So right now you will be removed from the voters list of Camden County at this point. You do have some recourse. All right, it says if the Board of Election and Registration uphold the challenge, the person's application for registration shall be rejected or the person's name removed from the list of electors as appropriate. The elector shall be notified of such decision in writing, either by first-class mail addressed to the mailing address shown on the person's voter registration records or in the matter provided in. In other words, we could subpoena you. Either party shall have the right to appeal from the decision of the Board of Election and Registration to the Superior Court by filing a petition with the clerk of the Superior Court within 10 days after the date of the decision of the Board of Election and Registration. A copy of such petition shall be served upon the other parties and the Board of Election and Registration unless and until the decision of the Board and Election and Registration is reversed by the court. The decision of the Board of Election and Registration shall stand. Do you have a question, sir?
Yes, my attorney is out of town. That has to be filed for
10 days after this decision, it has to be filed. And it doesn't say 10 business days, it says 10 days. Okay. Pardon? Yes, yes. That you'll have a copy probably by Monday of our decision so that you can file whatever paperwork you need to file. Okay. Any additional public comments? All right. If there's no objection, this meeting will adjourn.
So moved.
Seeing no objection, this meeting is adjourned.